The true art of defeating an enemy is one that requires no swords, no banners, and no cries of battle. It is an art that transcends the tangible acts of warfare and enters the realm of the mind and spirit. Victory can, in fact, be achieved without striking a single blow, and today we explore this notion not through the lens of combat, but through the pursuit of wisdom and understanding. We must acknowledge that the battlefield of ideas is often far more consequential than any physical conflict. The minds of men, their beliefs, and their ideologies are the true territories worth winning. When we seek to destroy our enemies, it is not their flesh we should strike, but the roots of their convictions. We can undermine their position, not by force, but by offering a more compelling truth, a truth that resonates with reason and virtue. It is in the nature of humans to cling to beliefs, even those that may be flawed. To sway a mind, then, is to plant a seed of doubt, to show that their reasoning, however well guarded, is built upon shaky ground. The most effective form of victory is often to render the enemy's position untenable, not through aggression, but through superior ideas. This requires a certain moral clarity, a refusal to descend to the tactics of cruelty or deceit. True power lies in the strength of one's principles and in the ability to maintain that integrity even when tempted by the desire to strike back. A conqueror, whose only weapons are wisdom and self-control, has already won the battle before it ever begins. We must recognize that sometimes the most powerful tool of all is inaction. When we refuse to be drawn into the fray, when we resist the provocation, we force our adversary to reveal their own vulnerabilities. Without our response, their aggression becomes a reflection of their own instability. In this silence they expose themselves. Subtlety of influence is an often overlooked yet immensely powerful strategy in the art of overcoming adversaries. In many situations, it is not through direct confrontation that one achieves victory, but through the quieter, more insidious process of influencing an enemy's thoughts, beliefs, and decisions. This form of warfare is not about brute force, but about shaping the very environment in which your adversary operates, creating conditions that undermine their position without them even realizing it. To succeed in this, one must understand that most conflicts are not won through overpowering strength, but by shifting the very foundations upon which the enemy stands. At the heart of this strategy is the notion that our ideas, once embedded in the minds of others, can act as an invisible force that compels change. It begins with the careful introduction of doubt, sowing seeds in the soil of certainty. By subtly challenging an enemy's assumptions, one can cause them to question their own premises without ever confronting them head-on. This doesn't require direct aggression or accusation, rather, it demands the introduction of alternate perspectives, presented in such a way that the enemy must grapple with them, even if they are not immediately willing to accept them. It is the art of presenting an idea so compelling that it forces the enemy to reconsider their own. For instance, when dealing with an adversary who holds a rigid set of beliefs, it is rarely effective to engage in an all-out confrontation, shouting that their ideas are wrong. Such an approach only entrenches them further in their stance. Instead, one must look for moments of vulnerability, times when their beliefs might be questioned, not by force but by suggestion. This could take the form of presenting them with a seemingly innocuous example or offering a slight counterpoint that, over time, erodes the strength of their position. The influence here is not in the loud and dramatic, but in the soft and persistent. The slow accumulation of small doubts can eventually lead to a profound shift in perspective. Subtlety of influence also requires the skill to make an adversary believe they have come to their own conclusions. Rather than imposing an external viewpoint, the most effective strategies work by creating an environment where the enemy feels empowered to change their mind on their own terms. People are far more likely to abandon their positions when they believe they arrived at a conclusion independently. This is the crux of subtle influence, providing the space for an individual to entertain new ideas while making them feel as though these ideas are their own. The manipulation of thought does not involve force or even persuasion in the traditional sense, but involves creating a cognitive space where change can happen organically. The power of subtle influence lies in its ability to remain undetected. The most skilled manipulators of thought and perception are those who operate under the radar, invisible to their opponents until it is far too late. In this sense, the strategist who employs subtlety operates much like a skilled chess player, positioning their pieces in ways that gradually lead to victory, all while the opponent remains unaware of the threat. This level of influence is not overt, it is slow and steady, requiring patience and careful planning. A single, well-placed idea, repeated enough times and in enough ways, can ultimately cause an adversary to re-evaluate their position without ever realizing that the shift was not a result of their own decision-making, but rather the product of a subtle campaign of influence. Subtle influence is often far more durable than direct confrontation. When one defeats an enemy by overpowering them in battle, the victory is usually temporary. The defeated will regroup, rebuild, and seek revenge. But when you influence an enemy through subtlety, when you alter their thinking, you change the very nature of the conflict. Once an enemy has been influenced to question their own position, that shift is much harder to reverse. It is like a tree that, once uprooted, cannot be replanted in its original soil without significant effort. Subtlety causes an internal transformation, rendering the enemy's former beliefs untenable or irrelevant in their new context. This process also applies not only to ideological enemies but to personal conflicts as well. For example, in situations where emotions run high, say, between friends, family, or even colleagues, the battle often lies not in proving who is right or wrong, but in managing perceptions and relationships. By subtly shifting the way others view a situation, one can alter the course of the conflict without ever having to engage in a direct confrontation. It is about guiding others to the realization that their view of the world may not be as absolute as they once thought. The ultimate victory is achieved when your adversary becomes their own agent of change. In every interaction, there is a hidden battle for influence. The one who controls the narrative, who shapes the thoughts and beliefs of others, controls the outcome of the conflict. Whether through a simple suggestion, a well-timed story, or the careful presentation of facts, subtle influence allows one to dismantle an enemy without ever engaging in open warfare. It is a strategy that relies on intellect, patience, and understanding of human nature, recognizing that the greatest power lies in shaping the invisible forces that guide people's actions and beliefs. Intellectual combat is a concept that extends beyond the physical confrontation of adversaries, focusing instead on the battle of ideas, where the strongest and most compelling thoughts emerge victorious. It operates on the premise that the minds of individuals can be influenced, shaped, and ultimately won through the power of reason and logic. Engaging in intellectual combat is not about defeating others with brute force or aggression, but rather about presenting arguments, facts, and ideas that dismantle the foundation of an enemy's beliefs, thereby leading them to reconsider and, in some cases, abandon their position. In this realm, victory is not defined by external conquests, but by the triumph of reason, critical thinking, and intellectual honesty. The first key element of intellectual combat is the recognition that ideas are the true weapons in this type of warfare. Ideas shape our worldview, influence our decisions, and ultimately determine our behavior. By mastering the art of intellectual combat, one learns to engage not in physical confrontation, but in a battle for the control of thought itself. An idea, once firmly rooted in the mind of an individual, can hold considerable power, dictating their actions and attitudes. To win this battle, one must present an idea that is more persuasive, more logical, and ultimately more compelling than the one held by the adversary. The power of a well-constructed argument, backed by evidence and sound reasoning, can disrupt even the most entrenched beliefs. In intellectual combat, the strength of an argument is paramount. It is not enough to simply challenge an opponent's views. One must offer an alternative that is not only logically sound but also appealing. The art lies in presenting facts, evidence, and reasoning in such a way that the enemy is forced to confront the inherent weaknesses in their own position. This requires a deep understanding of both the subject at hand and the mental framework of the opponent. A skilled practitioner of intellectual combat can find the gaps in an adversary's argument, the inconsistencies in their reasoning, and the contradictions in their beliefs. By highlighting these weaknesses, one can create a situation where the enemy's position begins to crumble, not due to external pressure, but because of the internal contradictions that exist within their own arguments. In this battle of ideas, it is also essential to maintain intellectual humility. Intellectual combat is not about overwhelming the opponent with sheer force of personality or rhetorical flourish. It is about convincing them through reason and evidence. The most effective combatants in this realm understand that they are not infallible and that their own ideas and positions must be open to scrutiny. By demonstrating an openness to dialogue and debate, the combatant signals that they are not seeking to crush their opponent, but rather to engage in a genuine exchange of ideas. This approach not only enhances the strength of one's argument, but also establishes credibility and trust with the opponent. When individuals sense that they are being respected and that their views are being taken seriously, they are more likely to consider the alternative perspectives being presented to them. Another crucial aspect of intellectual combat is the ability to anticipate and counter the opponent's arguments. Every idea has its weaknesses, and a skilled combatant will anticipate these flaws before they are exposed. By preemptively addressing potential counter-arguments, one can solidify the strength of their own position while simultaneously disarming their opponent. This requires a deep understanding of the issue at hand and the ability to think several steps ahead. It also involves the strategic use of logic and rhetoric to frame the conversation in a way that benefits the person presenting the idea. Through careful preparation, one can ensure that their argument remains resilient against attacks and that the enemy's arguments appear weaker by comparison. Intellectual combat is not merely about defeating an opponent's arguments, but about reshaping their worldview. A successful engagement of ideas can lead to a transformation in how an individual perceives not only the issue at hand, but also their broader understanding of the world. The ultimate goal is not just to win the argument, but to change the underlying framework through which an individual interprets reality. This type of transformation is not immediate. It requires patience, persistence, and a careful, nuanced approach. Intellectual combat is a gradual process of persuasion where ideas are tested, debated, and refined over time. The true victory in this realm is when the adversary comes to realize that their previous understanding was flawed and that a more accurate, more coherent view has now taken its place. It is important to note that intellectual combat, while focused on the exchange of ideas, is also a deeply personal endeavor. When engaging in such battles, the adversary's beliefs are often intertwined with their identity and worldview. To attack these ideas is to challenge a fundamental part of who they are. As such, Intellectual combat requires not just skill and strategy, but also empathy and respect for the other person. It is possible to engage in a battle of ideas without resorting to personal attacks or insults, and in fact the most effective intellectual combatants are those who can separate the ideas from the person presenting them. By focusing on the merits of the arguments rather than the flaws of the individual, the combatant can maintain the integrity of the exchange and increase the likelihood of reaching a constructive outcome. Intellectual combat ultimately teaches us that the mind is a battlefield, where the greatest victories are won not through physical force, but through the power of reason and ideas. It is in the realm of ideas that the most profound changes occur, and it is through the careful, thoughtful engagement of opposing views that we can influence others, change their perspectives, and in some cases alter the course of history. In this battle, the ultimate victory is not simply in proving oneself right, but in contributing to the collective pursuit of truth and understanding. The importance of maintaining the moral high ground in any conflict, especially one where the goal is to defeat an enemy without direct confrontation, cannot be overstated. This approach requires a commitment to principles that transcend the immediate pressures of victory, and it is a crucial element in achieving true success. Maintaining the moral high ground means acting with integrity, adhering to ethical standards, and refusing to engage in methods that would compromise one's values. It is not about being passive or allowing an adversary to exploit your sense of justice. Rather, it is about ensuring that, in the pursuit of victory, your actions are always in line with the higher ideals of fairness, respect, and wisdom. One of the core aspects of maintaining the moral high ground is the recognition that victory obtained through unethical means is ultimately hollow. Winning at all costs may provide temporary satisfaction, but it does not lead to lasting change or respect. It may force an opponent into submission or compliance, but it does not change their heart or beliefs. The victory gained through dishonesty, manipulation, or brute force is one that only creates resentment and opposition. In contrast, adhering to higher ethical standards ensures that victory is achieved in a manner that leaves no room for regret or guilt. By acting in a way that is consistent with your values, you guarantee that the victory is one of genuine merit, not just the consequence of a more powerful strategy. Maintaining the moral high ground also serves as a form of protection against the corrosive effects of conflict. Conflicts, especially prolonged ones, can erode the character of those involved, tempting them to abandon their principles in the name of victory. The pressures of war or competition can lead individuals to justify harmful tactics such as deceit, coercion, or underhanded manipulation, simply because these methods seem effective. However, by holding firm to a moral standard, one prevents the erosion of personal integrity. It becomes a safeguard that ensures that, even in the heat of the moment, the actions taken are in line with your core beliefs. This protection is crucial, not only because it helps maintain one's self-respect, but because it also builds the foundation for sustainable success. When you defeat an adversary through ethical means, you do so in a way that allows for future reconciliation, respect, and perhaps even admiration. This is far more valuable than a victory gained through morally questionable methods. The ability to maintain the moral high ground also places you in a position of greater strength in the long run. While it may seem that power gained through manipulation or force is superior in the short term, it is often fleeting. People tend to rally around those who act with integrity, and they gravitate towards leaders who exemplify wisdom, fairness, and compassion. Those who win through dishonorable means often face internal dissent, loss of trust, and betrayal, which can undermine their position. In contrast, Those who maintain the moral high ground, even when it seems difficult or costly, build a foundation of trust and loyalty that strengthens their position in ways that sheer power cannot. The respect earned from acting with honor and dignity gives one an influence that is not easily toppled by external forces. Maintaining the moral high ground creates a deeper sense of purpose and meaning in the pursuit of victory. It shifts the focus away from merely winning and places it on the values and ideals that are worth fighting for. When an individual chooses to maintain ethical standards, they are not simply fighting against an enemy, they are upholding a cause that is aligned with higher principles. This sense of purpose is a source of internal strength that fuels persistence, even in the face of adversity. It provides clarity in difficult moments and ensures that one's actions remain consistent, regardless of external pressures. This moral clarity is crucial in guiding decisions, especially when those decisions require difficult trade-offs or when confronted with the temptation to compromise on principles for the sake of expediency. The moral high ground provides a broader perspective on conflict. It invites individuals to consider the larger context in which they are acting, beyond the immediate goals of defeating an enemy. The true purpose of any conflict, especially one fought without direct confrontation, is not just to vanquish an opponent, but to bring about a positive change. When you hold on to moral principles, you are not merely defeating an enemy, but you are doing so in a way that encourages growth, reflection, and ideally reconciliation. Even when victory seems imminent, the moral high ground challenges one to reflect on the consequences of the victory and whether it will ultimately lead to the betterment of society, relationships, or the self. Holding onto the moral high ground also has a profound impact on one's ability to inspire others. In times of conflict, individuals often look to their leaders for guidance and strength. Leaders who maintain ethical standards, who refuse to resort to dishonorable tactics, set an example that resonates with others. Their integrity and commitment to doing what is right, even when faced with temptation or difficulty, inspire those around them to do the same. This influence is far more powerful than any temporary advantage gained through manipulation or deceit. It fosters a sense of unity, trust, and shared purpose among those who follow. It is crucial to recognize that the moral high ground is not a passive stance but an active choice. It requires constant vigilance and self-awareness. One must be prepared to make difficult decisions that may not always align with short-term goals or desires. This requires the strength to say no to methods that might seem effective but are ultimately damaging. It demands the courage to stand firm in one's beliefs, even when others may criticize or challenge that stance. However, it is precisely through this commitment to doing what is right that individuals are able to achieve not just victory, but a victory that is both meaningful and enduring. Psychological warfare is one of the most potent tools in achieving victory without the need for physical confrontation. It operates on the premise that the mind is the true battlefield, and once you understand how to manipulate perceptions, beliefs, and emotions, you can render an opponent defenseless without ever raising a weapon. The power of psychological warfare lies in its subtlety and its ability to affect an enemy's decisions and actions by targeting their psychological vulnerabilities. It is about changing how an enemy thinks, feels, and perceives the world, often without them even being aware of the manipulation. The first key to effective psychological warfare is understanding the nature of perception. People make decisions based on how they perceive reality, not necessarily on objective facts. This means that if you can control or influence how an adversary perceives a situation, you can influence their behavior and decisions. Perception is often shaped by emotions, biases, and past experiences, and these factors are not always rational. By understanding what drives these perceptions, you can plant ideas, suggest doubts, or create fears that alter the way the enemy interprets events. It might involve exaggerating their weaknesses, highlighting their fears, or subtly undermining their confidence. This is not done by direct confrontation or argument, but by carefully orchestrated events, confident in their own understanding of the situation. Psychological warfare can exploit the enemy's insecurities, fears, and self-doubts. Every individual or group has weaknesses, emotional triggers, and points of vulnerability. By carefully observing and understanding these aspects, you can target them directly. For example, if an adversary is deeply insecure about their leadership abilities, subtle comments or actions that undermine their authority can cause them to question their decisions, weaken their position, and lead to mistakes. Psychological warfare does not require direct confrontation. It is often far more effective to make the enemy feel as though they are failing on their own. The more they doubt themselves, the less effective they become in their actions. Another powerful element of psychological warfare is the manipulation of emotions. Emotions are strong drivers of human behavior, often overpowering rational thought. By understanding how to provoke certain emotions such as fear, guilt, anger, or anxiety, you can influence how an enemy responds to a situation. For instance,